All right, your assignment was to pick some of your favorite passages from Lord of the Flies and explain why they're your favorites. Well, I'm going to do this. Whoa, let's not move the camera around so much. Pardon me. I'm going to read the end of chapter 9, A View to a Death. Now, you'll recall, I have some pieces underlined here, but you'll recall that it's Simon who gets killed at the end of this chapter. If you're not up to chapter 9, well, why not? And sorry I spoiled it for you. Simon becomes a bit of a Christ like character. He goes off into the jungle on a kind of a spiritual journey, and that's where he sees the head of the pig, and he sees the beast from the air, the dead parachutist, and he runs out to tell the boys what he's found, to reveal the truth about the beasts on the island, and they're in a bloodlust. They've killed a pig, and they've cooked it, and they're eating it, and they're dancing around in their violent joy, and they mistake him for a creature, and they kill him. And then something important happens at the end. It's almost like a reverse baptism. So let's look at the end of this chapter. And I have some things circled and underlined because I like this part here. His language here, the author's language here is beautiful. Golding does some things here that, yes, it's a hard book to read. It's a hard book to face up to some of the things that he says about human nature. But when I look at the language like this is why we still read this book. Along the shoreward edge of the shallows, the advancing clearness was full of strange moonbeam-bodied creatures with fiery eyes. Here and there a larger pebble clung to its own air and was covered with a coat of pearls. The tide swelled in over the rain-pitted sand and smoothed everything with a layer of silver. Now it touched for the first of the stains that seeped from the broken body, and the creatures made a moving patch of light as they gathered at the edge. The water rose farther and dressed Simon's coarse hair with brightness. The line of his cheek silvered, and the turn of his shoulder became sculptured marble. The strange attendant creatures, with their fiery eyes and trailing vapors, busied themselves round his head. The body lifted a fraction of an inch from the sand, and a bubble of air escaped from the mouth with a wet plop. Then it turned gently in the water. Somewhere over the darkened curve of the world, the sun and moon were pulling at the film of the water on the earth planet was held, bulging slightly on one side while the solid core turned. The great wave of the tide moved farther along the island, and the water lifted. Softly, surrounded by a fringe of inquisitive bright creatures, itself a silver shape beneath the steadfast constellations, Simon's dead body moved out toward open sea. My note here, you know, I underline this line. Then it turned gently in the water, and Simon's dead body moved out toward the open sea. Both describe Simon as as if he's a ship being pulled out to sea. There's a lot going on here. Creatures. I want you to count how many times and how many different descriptions of creatures. Who are the creatures? What are the creatures? He personifies Golding personifies the earth and the tide. Somewhere over the darkened curve of the world, the sun and moon were pulling, and the film of water on the Earth planet was held, bulging slightly at one side. As he describes the science of tides. But then he says later on, Simon's body. No. Simon's body is lifted up. The great wave of the tide moved farther along the island, and the water lifted, softly surrounded by a fringe of inquisitive creatures itself a silver shape between the steadfast constellations. Simon's dead body moved out toward the open sea. What would be the overriding emotion of the boys in these two paragraphs, do you think? Golding is exploring something very dark here, and he's using this kind of interplay between dark and light. He's exploring something very dark in human nature, but he's using very scientific language to describe the earth and how it moves. The science of the tides will always be the science of the tides. But the question about the darkness in the human soul is one that is left unanswered at the end of this chapter.